We're live. Welcome to the second conversation, Disembedded. I'm joined, last night I was joined by three friends, and tonight I'm joined by two folks I'm meeting for the first time. Even happier to talk to these folks because it's nice to meet new people. And it's a good group of people because we have someone who comes from outside of academic scholarship and has different norms, I think, when it comes to AI use, and also has done an analysis that I think is very illuminating for us academics. And then we have another academic, Peter, who works, in a kind of cognate area, and area studies. And, we sort of both work on depopulation a little bit. So slight connection there, but still definitely not in my milieu here at HKU, and not solidly in my discipline. So without further ado, we'll start with Parth. Parth, you have done, and we'll post the link, you've done this wonderful analysis of disclosure on Substack. So maybe you could start by just talking about the context for the study. You're a Substacker, you can give some context for that, and then the study that you did.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you for hosting this. I think it's super cool that you're recording and putting it online. And I'm glad you find my study wonderful. So yeah, on the Substack itself, it's just something I do on the side alongside my job. Like I like to think in terms of data, and I'm like there's so many problems I think that we can solve that way, and I just like pursue like whatever I'm curious about effectively. So on the study itself, it's called Slop Detective. The idea was I recently found out about Pangram, the AI detection software, when Substack announced that they were going to integrate it from, I think, July onwards, where you could start scanning people's posts to see if it's human detected, AI detected, all of that. And then as anyone who ever scrolls through LinkedIn, you can see like how annoying it is when you just see people like posting slop, right? It's just like the most annoying thing ever. And then you see all this engagement it gets. And I'm just curious, like, okay, now that we actually have a reliable way to detect AI software, can we actually see how our user is engaging with it? And I use Substack as like my choice of platform, partly because it's one of my favorite platforms, and the fact that they introduced the feature, I was like, okay, might as well give this a shot. And then for Pangram, at least like the earlier models, you need like a minimum of 50 to 100 words of text. So Substack tends to lend itself good for that kind of analysis. So I was just scanning a bunch of Substack posts, putting it through Pangram API, seeing how much was AI detected, how much was human detected, and then scraping like engagement metrics and stuff. And the TLDR of like what I found out is like the people who chose to disable the feature, like not allowing their readers to scan their Substack post, on average had almost 3 times the share of AI use, right? Uh, which is quite interesting because like if you kept up with the initial discourse around when the feature came out, a lot of people were angry. They're like, "Oh my god, like why are you doing this? Like we have like authentic connection with our readers, leads to witch hunts and whatnot." And it's just like this is just an adverse selection problem. Like regardless of what people say, this is kind of like what you expect the behavior to be. And then another kind of intuitive finding was like smaller publications on average tend to use more AI. I think this is reflective of people's writing ability because obviously, like if you have someone who writes extremely well, you would expect them to have more subscribers, more engagement. I think there's also a part you can say that they might not have as many resources to do like full-time writing or something, right? They need to like use AI tools to speed them up. So that's interesting. And then in Substack, people can self-tag their posts in terms of like what category it is. We have like finance, tech, business, whatever, right? And then I found that on average, like financial writing and tech adjacent writing tends to have higher share um, of AI usage. You would think that this is because like they are heavy adopters, but I feel like by the time you're in 2026, because all these posts are based in just 2026, I feel like everyone has kind of started using these tools quite heavily. So that didn't feel like a good enough explanation. One thing that Pangram did on their own, like their own independent studies, they found out like how much AI usage is there in like each of the different platforms. And you can see like, for example, LinkedIn or X and some of the other platforms we expect, like people using them for like commercial intent purposes, right? Because like I feel like a lot of the time like people are selling something there. They tend to have much higher AI proliferation. And just using that as an analogy, I thought like that's kind of why I expect finance writing and tech writing had like, at least on Substack, higher share of AI use, effectively. Yeah, I mean that's like the TLDR of like my post. Happy
Yeah.
to dive into anything you think is interesting.
I mean, I think it's great. And I think, as you point out in the post, the really useful aspect of this metric is it's continuous. So you, by opting in, you can, theoretically be opting into like 15-20% AI use. And what's interesting, because you talk about the initial reaction to this, and that this was very controversial. I'm most fascinated that people would be squeamish about disclosing that their scores 15%, 20%. Granting that I don't exactly know what 15% means, but it doesn't sound very high. And I think given the widespread use of these tools to do like lower order functions, like I don't see why there'd be stigma at all. Why do you think there's stigma or some
I honestly,
self-consciousness?
like, I mean, I have a pretty cynical view on this, to be honest. Like a lot of publications that I used to follow, and then once the tool came out, and I also like started paying for like the lower tier Pangram and started putting through posts, and I'm just like, this is kind of sad. Like a lot of people I follow who I have been like intuitively feeling like, oh, I'm just reading kind of like sloppy text. I'm just like, oh no, these authors are great. And I put their posts and I'm like, oh, I increasingly see that once they have enough engagement, they're starting to kind of automate away some of the things that they have been previously doing. I think like in terms of like the stigma, I think like it might just be like any percentages of AI usage in your text might signal that none of your work is original. It could be something like, oh, I'm just speculating. I don't know. I would think like if I see 20% score on someone's text, right, I'm like, oh, maybe like they generated it fully using AI, whereas the research question is, and then they just like edited the text to make it sound like human, right? So I think like that's maybe it's more of like the signaling around it that like any like decent chunk of AI-ness in your text might indicate to your readers that like this is not original work, like it's not worth their time, which I disagree with. I think like it's perfectly okay to use somewhat, right?
Yeah. Well, and maybe this is where like cultural norms come into it, and this is a good opportunity to bring Peter in, because Peter, in our area, you'll find journals that have like very austere AI policies, such that 15%, 20%, that's like unpublishable. And last night we had a whole discussion about the journal Progress in Human Geography requesting what they call light AI usage, which I think is probably sub 15 or 20%. So can you understand that desire to opt out, for people to opt out, so they're using these tools, but their culture doesn't accept even that level of use, so they opt out? Do you think that's a kind of academic instinct, at least in the social sciences where we are?
Yeah, I think in the social sciences and even more so the humanities, there's an instinctive and particularly if you like the softer side or the more cultural side or the more social side of the social sciences, um, as opposed to maybe economics or I'm just speculating here. There's an instinctive aversion to the use of AI tools because I think there's a suspicion or an assumption that it's not really the author's work. Um, but I I'm kind of very agnostic about this sort of thing, and I'm really here to try and learn about um, where the ethical boundaries lie, because they seem to lie in different places in different subjects. So we see over on one side of the university, AI in common use and for all kinds of different purposes. And university academics advocating the use of AI because of its apparent reliability, its speed of operation, that it can save you a lot of time, it can perform complex calculations and tasks that would take a human being a long time to perform, and maybe they wouldn't be able to perform. And can be used, for example, extremely useful as diagnostic tools, for example, in medicine and engineering and so on, which really saves a lot of people's lives. Um, and yet, in the humanities, we have a group of academics who are really, some of them, very vociferously against AI. I think that comes from a number of different directions. One is a stylistic direction, in the sense that the style of writing is apparently not produced by a human. So it's in some way inauthentic. Um, but there's also other reasons for that. So I think quite a lot of people in social science and humanities are against the use of AI tools, particularly in writing, because of the environmental impacts of AI,
Mm.
of data centers, the consequences in terms of energy usage and water usage, and building these places in remote places, which might be harmful for nature, and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of different things to unpack here. But personally, I'm really agnostic about this and really wondering. I I hesitate to say that some of those voices perhaps are not thinking through what real communication actually is and what AI can be used for in humanities and social sciences, and who is really the author of anything.
Hmm.
Um, because another aspect of the AI controversy, if you like, in social sciences and humanities is that apparently authors who use AI are plagiarizing other authors because of the way in which
Yeah.
AI agents are trained. So this is plagiarism going on, and so on. But I'm really rather agnostic about that. And the more I think it through, the more I think that not that those criticisms are misplaced, but that we need to have actually a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation for what actually constitutes human communication, human to human communication, as well as what constitutes human to AI or AI to human communication.
Yeah, I mean, because I guess uh, citing a corpus of theory and facts, which is just how we're trained, is, I mean, it's not plagiarism because you're attributing, but I mean, there, like, you're attributing kind of like the end of pipe part of that. There is a kind of common knowledge built up before that that is very analogous to what's in this black box AI system. You're not citing the entire thing, and maybe that's kind of that's a flavor of what you're getting at there, right? Like, oh,
I think
like
so. I mean, I'm really struggling to try and describe it and articulate it, because I don't at the moment I don't really know what I think about this. If you see what I mean, I haven't come to any kinds of conclusions or decisions, and
yeah.
really I'm not an AI expert, but all of us in academia, and I suppose I'm speaking for a lot of people here who are faced with the conundrum of AI is here to stay. The general public is not going to accept a ban on AI use because of its, for example, its applications in medicine and engineering and so on that I already mentioned. So, and most employers of the graduates that graduate from my university, or universities in the UK are going to be compelled by their most of the graduates are going to be compelled by their employers to use AI tools. So if we just say in the university no AI tools, then we're not preparing our students for graduation and we're not making them employable. And it would be a nonsense to do that. So, there are lots and lots of ways in which I'm thinking, well, we have to use this thing and not just it's there for our use and we could use it if we wanted to or and so on. We have to use it.
Yeah.
And the consequence of that is where do we use it? When do we use it? Where does the consensus lie in terms of its potential uses in academia and in training university students to become employable, for example?
Yeah, I think like part of why this conversation is so good is because we are part of this really weird culture, and I think it's a culture that's kind of weirder and weirder over the past decade or so, or a couple of decades. And like Parth represents someone like outside that culture, like presumably Parth, like you went to university, but like you're kind of standing on the shore more than we are. And like bringing you back in, one thing I was struck by this conversation we had last night and a few conversations I've had lately is like AI is revealing of this fact that like we seem to be doing different things, like even in the same department. So I think we're in the business of clarifying social issues, understanding social structures better. And if that's what we're in the business of doing, then the more social structure we can uncover and the faster we can do it, the better. Like that's what I see myself doing. But then I talk to people and I read like this Progress in Human Geography editorial, and they're talking about cognitive shortcuts. Like it's a bad thing to take cognitive shortcuts. Like presumably, if you use like a calculator, that's a cognitive shortcut. That's like not so good. And it's almost like this model, and I'm not trying to disparage the model. I think it's just a different model. Is one of like human achievement, where scholars are supposed to like take their brains and apply them to the highest and best use, and everyone else is supposed to kind of marvel at that and revel in that. And this is like more of a model that's like competitive cycling, like non-doping version, or like chess, non-computer version. And and maybe I'll throw it to Peter and then we could get Parth's like take on all this. I see myself as not in the human achievement business. I see myself more in the like, I'm trying to figure stuff out on behalf of society. And that's why I think I'm more into these tools. And I dope, this is a whole project that's like, I'm doping right now. I'm a 20% AI user, or maybe even higher. I mean, I still maintain a lot of autonomy over this process, but like, some people look at this and they're completely scandalized. Peter, does that kind of resonate with you, that formulation?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much on your side in the pragmatic applications of what we're doing in academia. That for me, there are very, very few of us that really should reasonably dignify themselves with the assumption that they're sort of some kind of a blue skies thinker, an unusually talented and creative blue skies thinker who's creating really very, very new and original ideas. Nearly everything that we do in academia it relies upon people previously who go uncited. And I've read hundreds and hundreds of articles and books, and yet I write an article which is really built upon that record of scholarship and that accumulated learning in a very significant way. And I write an article or even a book, and I cite, barely 5% of that, or less. And yet, apparently, AI is persona in inverted commas non grata. So,
Ah,
but my principal aim in academia, obviously, is to try and resolve problems and to try and help society, identify problems and maybe potentially critique different approaches to those problems, and help practitioners who are actually facing those problems themselves resolve them, so that we can improve the conditions of life for humans and other animals and species. So if AI is going to enhance that process, speed it up, and we really do need it speeded up when we consider that so little action has already so far been taken on really monumental human crises such as climate change, the biodiversity loss, pollution, war and social and political fragmentation, and so on. We really do need to speed these processes up. And quite frankly, um, traditional methods of academia are not quick enough. Um, well, and they've proven to be not quick enough. We need something else to help us, I think.
bringing, I mean, so obviously Peter and I are pretty aligned. Parth, what's your take, like looking over the fence, or like this conversation that we've had, or like, do you, in this like Substack community, or like in other communities you might be part of, do you also recognize people who have this more like human achievement oriented version of like how content should be created?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm hearing you guys speak about this as well, like in my head, they're like these two distinct strands with this particular issue. Like one is like the fact that, I mean, this is true for all technology, that it enables you to do like be more productive, do better work, right? Like if you just take coding for example, like previously you might have need to know like low level language or something. Like now I'm glad I can just like almost talk to it and get it done. For most of us, coding is a means to an end, right? Like I don't think anyone can disagree. Like that's like a good thing and it makes you more productive and all these things you guys said. Like you know, speeding up the process. I think the issue that a lot of people have, especially like me, because I recently graduated university, and then I ended up being in the workforce in like a post AI world where I'm just like I don't think I've learned how to do these things in like a hard way, right? Like I'm already offloading so much on the tool, and that's where it comes to this idea of like private property or like authenticity or ownership, right? It previously, like obviously you write papers, it's a process of like reading stuff and then connecting random ideas and you come up with some good idea that you want to publish, right? But then before, I think you could easily say or like assign, you know, taking plagiarism outside, like you can assign that the value of that output to the researcher, being like, oh, this is the person who's made it. Like you can like give them credit. But like now it's increasingly blurry where you can't really say like, oh, does this person deserve credit? Like, is this their original work? Apart from the quality of the work itself. I think that's like one of the things that everyone's having an issue with and doesn't really know how to answer. And then second is obviously you have cases where like sometimes you read an act like paper or a draft of a paper and you're just like, okay, this is like extremely difficult to like read or understand. And I think it becomes annoying when like a reader also realizes like, oh, the author themselves also don't understand this. Like, they've unloaded this burden on me to understand. So I think like there are these two distinct problems. Like one is like the progress and the pragmatic of like, oh, this is good to push science forward, and then the other is like at the same time, how do you attribute these things to people? Because like people derive whatever, like their identity and social connections and all of that to this other piece. That's like my kind of like take on it. I don't have an answer. That's why I was like curious because like you guys have had like some experience like working without these tools, right? Like you've developed some of these skills over time, and then obviously now you're using these tools. Do you guys feel this kind of weird estrangement from like your actual work? And how do you guys see yourself as like, where am I adding like value in this process? Like,
I mean, maybe to be fair to us and our colleagues, there is no, and I really like how you frame things, Parth. There's probably no domain where individual ownership, authorship over output, intellectual output, is so consequential. Like that's everything. Citation count is like the currency in academia. So that is the extent to which you personally have been credited for influential ideas. And so I think when we like obviously AI is going to introduce regimes that eat away at authorship a lot, because you've got these like decentralized way of authoring things, or you're just making it easier for some machine to author things. And I think for us, it's just going to be very hard to expect for us to even be middle adopters of this technology. Like, we're probably going to be very late adopters because it's so like because we just don't have the institutions that are equipped for it. But like in the real world, Parth, do you think like there's different institutions or different arrangements that are developing around like group authorship or like co-authorship with AI? Like, are there models that you could tell us about that like maybe would be influential within the academy?
I wish I had a good answer for you over this. I mean, like in obviously like commercial settings, like an employee doesn't really get authorship, right? Like it's really much all about the output and I guess like the revenue you can generate with it and whatnot. And in those settings, I guess like these considerations are not like a big issue. It's very much like a result oriented, like, oh, I think this is developing good models. I think like this is like spinning up good intelligence or whatnot, which I can use for other tasks. And that's like perfectly okay. I don't have this issue of ownership because I'm not. That's not what as a business we are selling, right? And I think the other content creation bit, like that, you see this, like, which is why like people slowly have been kind of this distaste for like whenever they identify anything like sloppy online, and they're just like not very happy with it because like they people are online because they are interacting with another person they can identify, and like when you read something like that you just cannot, and it's just like what am I doing here, like why am I online? Yeah, I mean I'd love to find out if there's like a nice model on actually group authorship that I recently discovered. I went to a hackathon like last weekend, right? And then it was like a simple, you're given a prompt, like a challenge, you have like a few hours to develop something, right? Um, I talked to the organizers after, and I was like, oh, like, you guys had given us the offer of like forming teams, but surprisingly, a lot of us ended up doing solo projects. Is this like a common thing? But now, like, people say, oh, increasingly we're seeing as like these coding tools are improving, people actually want to collaborate a lot less at these events because it's like such a friction to get your agent to talk to some other person's agent when I can just like keep spinning off stuff on my own. And which is like quite surprising to me because I was like, oh, I would have imagined like human collaborations harder because you have to communicate so many things. But like apparently this is also like one thing where like a solo person is kind of enabled so much more that they might seem like, this is like such a friction, like telling someone like what my setup is like and who's going to collaborate. It's going to slow me down. So I don't know if you guys are slowly experiencing this while like researching and stuff, but I totally see it sometimes. And it's like, oh, it is actually like I might as well just do this on my own. Like, why do I need to share things?
I mean, arguably that's the premise for my project, right? Like the whole thing is like there's this, so like in my field there's this whole idea that like these like knowledge spillovers between people locally, especially through face-to-face interaction, are generating a lot of benefit. And so I'm saying, oh, AI lets me, and like this is verboten in my field, AI really lets me like forego all that. So I'm like, I'm like your colleagues at the hackathon. I'm like opting into that.
Right.
But I don't know, Peter, you find that? I mean, I know you're kind of an agnostic on the big picture, and maybe you're like a light or moderate user of AI, but do you find yourself becoming more cloistered as a result of it?
Yeah, I do, and I mean, I use AI for mundane tasks that would take me much longer to perform if I hadn't used AI. I before AI, I used software to do that, and before software, I used a typewriter or whatever. I mean, so I think that a lot of this is sort of discussions really around not all of it. I mean, is really discussions around who really is the author of this and and its authenticity. But you know, when when we read AI slop on LinkedIn, which I mean, Parth is great in describing this. Is it's so funny when you read this stuff. It's so obvious, and it's actually really boring to read. Um, the point about this is we've had AI slop ever since people started writing.
Yes.
It's just that this time it's a machine
Yes.
producing
Yes.
because in the past, I mean, in the last 100 years, we used to call AI slop boilerplate, which was basically, when corporations, or what did we call it? Managerialism, or, all these kinds of expressions we use for really boring, obfuscating language where people don't really mean what they're saying, and they're not really thinking about what they're writing and so on. We've had all this before, and this goes way back, since you know time immemorial that leaders have stood up on podiums and talked to us as if we're children and used the same language, from one place to another, patronizing people with this nonsensical language that even a fool can really really start to take apart and critique and then throw it back. So um, this time it's just a machine that's doing the same thing, really. And people should be careful of it. Yes, I do use AI, and particularly for unimportant tasks, for playing around, for doing things that are rather mundane and boring, and I'd rather spend my time doing something else. And it occasionally enhances what I've produced, and it gives, also the idea, and I know this is probably going to be quite a controversial thing to say, but at least for an adult, and I'm not talking about children here or younger people even, but at least for an adult or someone of my age who's whose brain is way past that sort of early developmental stage. Um, the idea that AI would impair my cognitive functions, I think, is probably contrary to the evidence that I see from my own behaviors, because actually it frees me. It does all these mundane, boring tasks that really don't need much thinking about, and frees me up and gives me more time to do the real thinking, so I can go out on a walk and really think through the consequences of what I've just produced and come back and enhance it still further. So actually, for me, I find that AI actually improves my cognitive functions. If someone tested me for that, they might come to a different conclusion. That's how I feel it works for me. That's the evidence that I've seen in my own behaviors and in my own outputs. But is that really the case? I really don't know, because I haven't got inside my head with a bunch of wires and detection machines.
I mean, some people used to say, or maybe would still say, that like having a senior moment means you forget telephone numbers. But I personally, and this is a pre-AI technology, like um, outsourcing thing, I personally know like 3 telephone numbers. My brain just refuses to memorize telephone numbers, and it's like because I'm using technology as a crutch or a cognitive shortcut. And I would like to think that brain power is being used for more productive things. But it does beg a very interesting question, because Parth, like you as someone who really did a lot, like I mean, Peter's talking about like the sort of like most supple brain period. I think you're probably like you are probably in that period, and we're in that period when you were in college. Do you find yourself grasping for, because people are talking about like, are we going to lose some of these fundamental skills or knowledges? Or do you find yourself grasping for knowledge that you feel like you should have learned, but you didn't because you came of of like age in this AI period?
Yeah, I mean, like, full disclosure, this is partly why I like started writing a blog, because I'm just like, oh my God, like I see myself like, I don't know, like something about like my brain is slipping, where I'm just like, ever since like maybe like my, for context, I graduated like 2 3 years ago. I'm 24, so it came out like 4 years ago. I was maybe like a sophomore, junior,
Yeah.
whatever, like in college. And ever since then, I just been like, oh my God, I feel like I'm losing my ability to think. And this is why like I've picked up writing, because I'm like, this is like helping me in a way, right? Because I feel like I'm articulating, I'm thinking through things, and whatnot. So that's like definitely there, where like for a lot of people who are just getting started with their careers, it's like alienating in the sense that you actually kind of feel like you've stopped your cognitive development if you don't take stock and actually try to put in the practice. Um, so yeah, like most definitely that's like a extreme concern. And then that makes us think about our careers in the future and being like, oh, like then what then if I just become like a vegetable and I'm like not able to think for myself? Like am I gonna be able to earn in the future? Like am I able to gonna like climb up like the social ladder, right? Like these are actually concerns that people have like around my age. And I think that's like why you have such like strong opinions about it online. Um I had like a question for you guys actually kind of on this thread,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't know if you guys saw like about 2 3 weeks ago you had this news about like how some of the latest OpenAI like models started like proving some crazy math theorems, right? And a bunch of mathematicians were just like, oh my God, this is like either gonna put me out of work forever, and I feel like so idiot. And some of them were at the opposite, like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Like we can just do so much more math, right? Like, have you guys had like similar moments in your field and professions, talking to colleagues, and like, if such a moment did come to your field, like, how would you feel about it?
Yeah.
That question
Peter, what do
really
you
brings
think?
me, sorry, that question really brings me to what Picasso said when he saw the 15,000-year-old cave art in Lascaux in France. And Picasso looked at all this cave art, and he said, "We have learnt nothing." I mean,
Hmm.
the point he was making is that actually humans don't change, and we do change. Um, and we adapt to circumstances, and we adapt to the circumstances and the tools that we have around us. But fundamentally, actually, there's not much difference between you and I and the people who were living 10, 15,000 years ago. Um, there's probably not that much difference between us and the people who were living 200,000 years ago on the plains of the Serengeti in Africa. Um, in terms of the way we approach life and risk and opportunity and those sorts of things. Um, I, I think at universities we really have to integrate AI into what we do in a very serious way, and I don't think it's right just to say we're not going to and we can't use it. The genie is out of the bottle, and we just have to deal with it. And the way to do it is to actually openly integrate it with traditional skills and traditional skills building, and with much more open and frank discussions amongst ourselves as academics, but also between academics and students and amongst students as to what these skills really are and how we can honestly and openly integrate who we are as humans and what we do as humans with these machines, because these machines actually are produced by humans anyway. Um, so in a sort of, it's a very crude analogy, but I do think it's kind of true that Picasso said that, because, you know, it's not that different from sharpening a flint.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, sorry to push back on this. I think I get the point. Like just on the flint analogy, I think a lot of people are worried that this is one of those things where like starts sharpening itself without the human in the loop, which I think feels disorientating. But it also could be one of those things that younger generation is living through it for the first time, so it feels like, oh my God, this is like the most novel thing ever. And maybe that's wrong. Yeah.
On that matter, I watched actually kind of in preparation for this talk. I watched a really interesting video or film made by BBC last night on streaming BBC about the use of AI robots in you know, to replace taxis and humanoid robots and so on. I mean robotic cars and so on, as well as humanoid robots, and the discussion over that question that you ask, Parth, which is a really, really important question, which is how do younger people bridge the gap now that is appearing between graduating from university and then going into jobs that require higher order human functions, and where the intervening gap of lower order human functions is increasingly being replaced by AI. So people who go into the labor force at the age of 18 or 21 or 24 or whatever, they need a period of a few years to get used to being in the labor force, to learn really quite quite basic and mundane functions, and to learn to get around the labor force, learn to get around their workplaces, and build up basic knowledge and basic skills to be able to go into those higher order positions. And by the way, I mean, you know, people have been losing their minds in their first and second jobs ever since first and second jobs ever existed. Because they've been asked to, for example, dig a hole and fill it up again. These sorts of things.
Yeah.
When people really have been losing their minds and thinking, why did I go to university if I actually have to, if all I'm doing right now is data entry into an Excel spreadsheet. So again, I think I get your point, but we sometimes do exaggerate the newness of AI. But at the same time, your point about the flint sharpening itself is a really important one. And I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that one.
I mean, in terms of the math question, Parth, like, I don't think my discipline is structured. I mean, like, it's said about chess, like, to use another chess analogy, that like chess players are miserable because there's only one chess player in the world who gets to say they're the best in the world. This is such a sheer meritocracy that there can only be one person on top. You ask any of my colleagues who the best human geographer in the world, they'll have a bunch of different answers, and half of them will say themselves. And this is a very comfortable place to be, because everyone gets to, like, if they don't think that they're the best geographer in the world, they get to say to themselves, what if I am the best? Or what if I am one of the best? Or they get to set up little like small worlds where everyone, like 10 people are studying each other's articles, and like it's as though everyone's really famous because they are in the small world. In other words, we're not like math. We don't have these like enduring problems with clear benchmarks that AI gets to help solve, and therefore we don't have the integrity of having these like sobering moments. But we do in a kind of smaller way. Like, and I'll give you one small version of this. It's with coding. Parth, if you were to like see the sorts of coding that gets called coding in my neck of the woods, you would probably just laugh. I mean, like, we're not coders. We just we figure out how to do we have to figure out how to do the same functions over and over again. Sometimes we use the same scripts that we got from our advisors. But nonetheless, we all had to learn to do that minimal amount of coding in graduate school. And because we weren't selected to graduate school with an ability to code, it was hard for us. And then AI comes along, and like, let's just take someone who graduates from a PhD program in 2022 and someone who enters a PhD program in 2022. That person who graduates had to like work so hard to get the coding ability that the person who's entered in 2022 can get within a month with an AI tutor. And in this specific case, it's just depression. It's just like real sadness that like I spent so much time, in some cases so much money, to do this thing. I thought it made me special. I thought it gave me a moat in the labor market, and now, and in this way, I'm no longer protected. So I think like at the edges, you get those little moments, but then in the core of I think a lot of our disciplines, it's like we're not even equipped. We don't even have the like benchmarks to find out that we should be terrified.
Just to follow up, actually, I don't know like how long we're going on for, so I'll just like
Just
continue.
as long as we want, yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So just on this thread that you put, I think is interesting, right? Like you say, right, like it is kind of frustrating that you spend all this time developing these skills that like someone can just easily pick up, or like arguably don't even need to learn anymore. But like on the returns to expertise, like do you feel like now that you are at least like this week that you will like kind of like AI Max and try to get out like a really good paper or whatnot, like you feel like you have that moat or the advantage of being able to prompt it or write the ask questions or manage the AI agents better because you did all those things before. So you have an idea of being like, okay, I've done this before. I kind of know what I want my AI agent to do. I can supervise them better, versus like someone who did not do all those like who did not learn all those skills from like first principles, where they just kind of like take it for granted or whatever like the agent spits out. And like how you have conversations with your colleagues about this, where you actually do see like a steep returns to expertise kind of thing, or is it actually like no, this is actually a more decentralizing technology where like the gap is closer now between like kind of a junior researcher and like a senior researcher?
So this is fascinating. I'm reflecting on this for the very first time, like right now with you, Parth, and you, Peter. I think like grad school and like working as an academic has trained me to be within a discipline, or sorry, be within like a topic area within a literature, understand where the really interesting parts of that literature are, and then I do like research design in graduate school, and I get this like sort of sense of like how to structure research questions. So how to like fill the gaps in the literature, and those skills are really serving me well now. And then I just get to like it takes me way less time to code, so I'm just way faster filling those gaps. But I think for me, my comparative advantage has always been with these things that I'm doing now. Like I'm just naturally better at understanding where areas are in the literature. I'm naturally better at doing like big picture design stuff and conceptualization than techniques. And so it's helping me better. If I was more of a like the sort of person that I would like rely on formerly before AI for advice, great people with like great coding skills, I might be a little bit more terrified about what was going on. I don't know how you feel, Peter, or what you're observing from others.
I think I've benefited enormously from my academic training in terms of developing my critical analytical skills, in being able to basically, have a pretty good BS detector in my head when I'm reading academic work, um, but also to be constantly asking questions of what I'm reading. These are not necessarily critical as in, negative criticism. They're critical as in trying to think through, is that really true, or what are the consequences of that statement? Or, constantly asking myself these questions as I'm going through someone else's text when I'm reading it. And um, I'm wondering if AI will uh, how academics will develop those skills alongside or with AI. Um, I'm sure they will be, but I think this goes back to my call, if you like, for a, a, a proper a, a proper integration of AI and a proper conversation that really identifies what we do as academics and how we learn how to do it, and how we can integrate AI into that process to enhance it, so that it becomes a really useful tool, but it's still a tool, that it doesn't govern us. Um, I'm sure, my daughter, she's 18. She relied on a calculator in her maths education, as did I. So, we, to do all the trigonometry, the cosine, the sine, and the tangent, and all that sort of thing, make all those kinds of calculations. You can't do it. I mean, you can without a calculator, but it just takes a long time. And you have to learn it and so on. And learning how to do that, I appreciate it does help to develop cognitive skills, but it's how to use AI and maintain those cognitive skills, and how to use AI and maintain and develop our critical functions and critical analytical abilities, I think it will be really is a kind of a thing I've been thinking about.
Well, this reminds me of a conversation we were having last night where like these critical skills you're describing, Peter, seem especially useful in the context of AI gives you a response and it seems really credible, but is it? And like with critical skills, you seem like the best partner that an agent can have. But at the same time, when I describe a future academic to current academics that is doing a lot of grading AIs, checking AIs, they just feel like really bummed out about that kind of future. And there's this metaphor of like a reverse minotaur or something, where you're not even like telling the machine where to go, like the machine's telling you where to go, and you're just kind of checking their work. Where do you kind of like fall there? Like, um, is like that kind of critical thinking really a acceptable future as like a main academic function?
I mean, with teaching and grading and reading other people's work, I think, I mean, students' work, and we go right up to PhD level here. I honestly think that there's absolutely no harm in asking students, on the one hand, as part of their work, to sit down and write essays by hand. Um, I think writing by hand is an incredibly useful cognitive development tool, both in terms of taking notes during lectures, as well as and organizing material and understanding what's really important and what isn't, because you've only got a certain amount of time to write down what that guy just said before he goes on to the next point. So, writing notes and so on, for example, during lectures, saying to students, during this lecture, no electronic equipment allowed at all. You're going to do it by hand. You're going to write your essay, which is 50% of the assessment for this module, by hand. But at the same time, you also ask students to perform well-designed tasks that require them to use AI. And, the students then and you then take students into post-task evaluative discussions, and you ask the students, well, what did you get out of writing that essay by hand? What were you thinking while you were doing it? Or producing your notes during that lecture. What were the difficulties and challenges that you experienced, and sharing that amongst the students, and then having post-task evaluative discussions with AI tasks as well, and asking the students and seeing how the students have got ideas about how to integrate the two different forms of different tasks into something that merges the two and integrates the two together, that includes oral discussion and so on. I think we're going to have to move towards those kinds of evaluations and assessments of students. But actually, I think that would be incredibly interesting to do for the lecturer, to actually go into to actually design and ask students to do it and go through the post-task evaluations and so on, to go through that whole process of assessment. I think would be incredibly interesting, because even with essays that are written by hand, I can tell you 9 out of 10 are really crushingly boring. And 9 out of 10 AI essays are going to be crushingly boring too.
Yep.
I would think that some kind of set of integrative tasks that involve all of those different ways of producing and interacting between machine and human, and between human and human and lecturer and student, and all of those sorts of things would be so much more interesting and stimulating and fulfilling for the lecturer. And I think it would be even more so for the student.
I mean, yeah, some of that is like brand new thinking for me. It's fascinating. Like, I get intuitively that there's something about, like, when I was revising for exams when I was a kid, there's something about writing that just, I don't know if it's because it's tactile or something, that just like weighs down the information in your brain a little bit more. Parth, what do you think as a recent graduate?
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I don't want to speak for everyone else in terms of the recent graduate cohort, because very different views on this. But yeah, I mean, like, I really like the experiment you laid out. I remember seeing, I think The Economist had like a nice like article about it a couple of months ago, where like they measured like students' grades on like homework versus like, in-person exams, and then like it's like these are like two different distributions. Like in the homework, everyone's like a superstar, right? And then it's like when they come in and do an exam, it's just like, oh my god, you're not even the same person. Yeah, so I mean, like, I think that that's like an alarming thing, like for educators to find out about, right? Because then you're just like really questioning, like if is a student really getting the most out of this? I mean, like, it's one of those things where, like, I think the skill set that is valuable, like at any given point of time in any field, like rapidly evolves, right? Like that's like pretty natural. And that's like, I think, understandable as well. But I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and a lot of people online have been saying about, like, and I guess this is what you're doing, Patrick, with like recording yourself, researching, is like these tacit, like unspoken, like almost untaught, but something you pick up doing the things over time that like tend to be extremely valuable, like underappreciated, but like extremely valuable. And I'm just like trying to understand, like, in research, for instance, in your fields, like, what are some of those things, if you had to articulate, like, that is like, unwritten, but is like extremely important to deliver good outcomes?
I don't know if we know. I mean, like, this was the original impetus for this project. It's like so much of academic work you just do tacitly, and we don't understand it. And video is like kind of gives a lot more clues into what's going on. But like that's the whole thing. Like, it's why, a famous chef, a world famous chef, is it gets to charge a premium because it's why they get to sell cookbooks, which seem to give everything away and then still charge a premium for their wage because of the tacit knowledge. With the study though that you mentioned, Parth, like, and as a recent graduate, I do want your perspective on this. I think people are misreading that study a little bit. I think they listen to that study, they're like, oh, everyone plagiarizes in homework, but then when they have to like prove it, they can't do it, and so they're just not learning anything. As opposed to like, like there are presumably some more progressive professors who are assigning homework that you can't just like plagiarize through AI to do well on. So like I do just imagine, and I see through some of my students like that there is a kind of co-piloting skill base, maybe something along the lines of what Peter's describing, that's emerging here. And maybe we're still, even when we're succeeding in those cases, falling short of creating knowledge that people can demonstrate without any aid. But then there's some people like Scott Cunningham, who's a really influential economist, talk about AI stuff. And he was talking today, like, why do we give these problem sets that don't allow for the equivalent of calculators when that's not, it's not kind of externally valid? Like, when is that? When are people ever going to need that? So I know it seems pretty complicated, as annoying a conclusion as that is.
I think a lot of it is in the more I do this, the more I realize that the central core of a really good study, really good piece of research, is the methodology. And the way the methodology is articulated in the paper. Because so much of the reliability of the data itself, the way it's used, and the way the outcomes are interpreted relies upon the methodology. And so more and more I look at the quality of the methodology when I'm reading other people's work, and more focusing myself on my own methodologies. I really, for me, I think that really is the kind of the fulcrum around which a really good study revolves.
And that's the sort of thing you get to think about more when you're walking.
When you're out. But the other thing that we need to consider, of course, is the fact that universities also kind of cheat. I say kind of cheat because it's really hard to. So one of the problems with introducing more rigorous assessment tasks, for example, handwritten assessment tasks, is if you start asking students to write handwritten assessment tasks, the university is probably going to lose revenue, because next door, you're going to have two universities like we do in Sheffield, and 3 or 4 in Manchester, and 3 or 4 in Leeds, and so on, and Nottingham. These are all kind of neighbouring cities. And if you've got only a small number of universities who are putting students through that kind of rigor, there will be students who are going to see that and think, actually, that's what I want, because I really want my fees to work for me in terms of improving who I am and what I can do. But there are going to be I would guess, a greater number of students who are actually thinking, well, I want my student money, I want it to work for me, but I also kind of want to enjoy myself, and I want some time to do this and that. And to be honest, that sounds like it's really hard. And I'm fearful that I'll actually show myself up, or all kinds of different thoughts going through their heads. And they'll decide, okay, well, I'm going to go to the university 20 miles down the road that doesn't ask me to do that. And so universities that have to compete against each other in a market-based system are going to really struggle if they unfortunately, I think, if in a market-based system where so much of university revenue derives from student fees,
Oh,
it's going to be really tough. And that's what, competitiveness as much as anything else is what drives AI slop, I think.
I have an interesting take on like what you just said. It sounds like very interesting to me. Like I wish we had enough time to like stop AI capabilities and run this study right now. I just like, oh, like a set of universities that are like having these two distinct approaches where one is like quite, I guess you could say forward or very, thing, and then one where it's like it still forces students to do these kind of like core exams that have always been done, while also like giving them AI tools for other activities, but like still doing that. Like, I wonder if you did that and then you fast forwarded and looked at like graduate outcomes and then the amount of wages that students earn from these two universities, you kind of would settle at an answer, right? Maybe like these students who went to this supposedly much challenging university are actually more valuable to employers and they actually should be commanding higher student fees. I mean, it'd be great to find out, but I feel like I don't know if you have the time to run that study.
Yeah, if you had a time machine, you could do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
next.
mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of local variation. I think there's not enough. In other words, like with any discipline, there should be a like to use the kind of doping analysis or analogy, like there should be like a doping journal that's basically like use as much AI as you want. Like we support it. Just like let us know how much you're using.
Mm.
And then there should be other journals that are completely strict, and at the same time, like there should be departments that are more or less strict, and then that would allow you to, and I think that the latter you do probably see, but the former you don't. You have these like you have this herding that I think is really bad. But I take your point, Parth, that like uh, there's just so much we need to know about what works, and we can't know everything to what you and Peter were saying. I guess I think we probably could talk forever about this, which is a good sign. But yeah, I mean, maybe any last thoughts from you two on maybe we can return to just the topic of like transparency, which Parth's study really focuses on. Like, do you see hope for more transparency? Because I think we will agree that like the adverse selection problem that Parth highlights is not good. Like that's net negative for everyone. Do you see much hope for more transparency, at least around AI, regardless of other directions? More or less transparency. Maybe Peter, we could say for you, like more or less transparency around AI use in academia, and then Parth, more or less transparency in Substack, so people adopting like disclosure more.
I mean,
I mean,
oh,
sorry, go ahead, Peter.
no, you go ahead,
I
Mark.
think,
You go ahead.
oh, okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think like as a consumer of like Substack, I would like I like that the fact that they have the feature, and I hope that we keep having transparency around it. Um, and I think like if you start seeing these signals where like authors that are or like whatever publications that are like more transparent about it, they see more engagement, like their users are happy, you have more paying users, then like that's automatically like a signal to be like actually like transparency is a good thing, people like it, right? Whereas like if you see cases where like people just don't care, they just want to consume what they want to consume, it doesn't matter if humans make it, AI make it, then you just kind of have the situation where it doesn't matter. That's one. I hypothesize that people will appreciate the authenticity and that kind of thing. The second is like, how long can we keep adding like transparency scores to AI outputs? Like, I think, yeah, Pangram has nice papers and details like why they think they can keep doing this. I'm sure like this is like maybe labs in the future. I don't know if it's like completely in their incentive to allow outputs to be completely transparent. Like, I'm sure like they are also thinking like maybe we should like make this as close to as like human looking as possible so people can't like tell if it's like slop or not, right? So those are the two things that I have like on transparency itself. Generally, all for transparency, but like I hope we can continue doing that. No.
Fascinating and kind of scary too, actually, as like a transparency person. Although, like, I guess the thing I'm experimenting with is just like record everything. My colleagues in academia, I think, almost universally support body cameras for police officers, but then probably at the same threshold would say, "Oh no, we shouldn't wear body cams as academics." But like, we could just all wear body cam. We could just all, and there's AI aided analysis of like how much AI you're using. This is kind of where I see this like extreme visions, kind of where I see, but like. I think on the scoring, that is kind of scary, right, Parth? Because like scores are more middle range solution. They're a lot more probably acceptable to people, and maybe to your point, it's not a sustainable one. Peter, how about you? Transparency in academia and around AI use.
Well, yeah, I'd like to see a lot more transparency among academics. At the same time, I'd like to see probably a lot more acceptance of AI, because we know that properly used, it does contribute contribute to and enhance knowledge and particularly solutions and can speed things along. So I'd like to see more acceptance of it, but at the same time, you have to have more transparency. Now, that's the age-old problem, isn't it? We've had plagiarizers in academia ever since academia existed. We're not gonna get rid of that. The question is did you really do it? And we need did you really use the tool, and did you really write those prompts and so on? And we need methods for kind of verifying the response. How do we do that? Body cams? I don't know. Body cams is it? I mean, I never heard anyone suggest that, but I mean, the police, the military, they all use them.
I say it kind of tongue in cheek, but not really. Not really. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like
no, I'm saying it tongue in cheek, Patrick. I mean, I'm not at all advocating for that.
Me too. Like same, yeah. Like
I'm absolutely saying it tongue in cheek, but at the same time, we know that academics cheat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some academics cheat. That's happened since time immemorial. People try and gain an unfair advantage in a highly competitive field where they feel perhaps a bit desperate and they feel inadequate or whatever it might be. They want to take shortcuts.
Yeah.
I do think, sorry, just to like one thing that you mentioned, super. I mean, this has kind of been like a little bit of like a negative AI conversation, but I think that what Peter mentioned was extremely important, was that people are accepting of the fact that you might have a journal that is like 40, 50, 60% like article that's like AI. And people are just like, oh my God, like even that's like 60% AI, and that's fucking awesome. That's like a great article. That also should be like an outcome that is accepted, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the point about using AI, if you produce a text that you're happy with and you're pleased with, and you've edited it, and you'll stand by every word that's on that page, but it happens to be 50% produced by AI because you prompted AI in some way So you start with the prompts, AI produces something, and then you edit it at the end, and eventually you've got something that you're pleased with, and you think, I can stand by every word on that page. I can argue it till I'm blue in the face, and I can argue with anyone the validity, the veracity, of the truth of this work. Then I don't see why. I don't see why not. So long as it's transparent and people know. But this goes for academic work. I
Yeah.
mean, people are using AI in all kinds of ways to, for example, I don't know, to enhance an email or whatever to their boss because they're nervous about what the boss might say. So they want to get the wording right and all of this sort of thing. People are doing it all the time. God, if you actually asked everyone, every single time they used AI to enhance a text of any kind whatsoever, it has to be formally declared, then again, you're just going to get massive amounts of cheating. So the point is with academic work, for example, that goes through peer review and all of that sort of thing that is added to the scientific canon, you really need transparency on all of that. But
I
at the
think,
same time, enhancing an email to a boss, enhancing a post on LinkedIn, or actually producing slop on LinkedIn, um, do we really need do we
yeah.
really? This is 60% AI.
I think a good rule of thumb is like as long as the author is benefiting from the perceived ownership of something, then they should be transparent. Yeah.
I like that. And I mean, Peter, like you gesture towards like a way in which academics might be able to lead, in that like we have been giving massive amounts of credit. So this is a credit area part to editors for a long time. So you edit a journal, you're not producing anything, but you get a status that's commensurate with producing. Like you're like that's for some people that's a career achievement, is editing a journal. And it's you could not write an entire thing. You could barely write an editorial the whole time. So maybe we kind of embrace that aspect of our tradition where editing is a real skill, and we just add to the mix, well, what you're editing is getting a little bit more diverse. Maybe that'll help normalize this a little bit more, because I think we're all in agreement that there's a weird kind of stigma, I think, in academics, and then probably for some of these people in Substack who are opting out and they don't want to even admit to any AI use at all. So like it's not just an academic that's probably specialized there.
I mean, going to the stigma, which you correctly sort of mentioned earlier on. I think it was towards the beginning of our discussion. I think this is a really important point, because one thing that I think is a little bit a part of this stigma is academics and, if you like, talented writers sort of reserving for themselves a certain kind of privilege and excluding others from being a part of the creative production community. I think some of that stigma that is being, I mean, this is a kind of a risky thing to say because I can't think for other people, but I get the sense that sometimes, and this really is a small number of times, but I get the sense that sometimes it's sort of putting up walls around academia and saying this is us and this is what we do, and we're this is our knowledge, this is our creativity, this is our style, and don't pretend to be a part of it. And I think that in the end actually has the reverse impact for it than is intended, in the sense that it contributes to this idea that a lot of people have outside of academia, that academia is it encloses itself in ivory towers, and it prevents access to knowledge and technology and ideas and so on that really are actually publicly owned, because the public pays for these institutions. And it privileges certain types of knowledge and it privileges the ways in which knowledge is produced in a way that is a little bit exclusive.
Yeah.
And I think we need to get away from that. And part of being transparent with AI is trying to get away from that and saying, look, these tools are for everyone to use, but we need to use them responsibly, and we need to integrate them with real human skills and attributes.
I know, Patrick, you were trying to wrap up, but I just had a thread I wanted to pull on this and wanted to ask you guys if that's okay. So there's this idea of like, transparency in academics, like, I don't know, you're saying you're usually guarded about like this ivory tower or whatnot. Like, I feel like a lot of people have talked about this trend where, like, be it Substack or any other long form sort of thing, like more and more academics are on these platforms and kind of sharing like shorter versions of their research that are more accessible to people and stuff like that. Like even on Twitter, right? Like I'm curious, like what do you guys think of this? Like as a consumer, I'm just like, oh my God, this is great. This is like a journal article normally that I would not bother reading because it's 30 pages and it's like text I like have to sit and think about. But like this 30-minute article version of this, I actually enjoy and I like to think about it.
I mean, I think, and this is very resonant with what Peter was saying about boilerplate. This tendency for AI to reveal, and I'm going to get to your specific question part, but like AI reveals language that we kind of put up with and we didn't like for being like fraudulent in some way, because it's just as though an AI could have just made it like the slop. And I think in a kind of opposite way, research that cannot be transmitted to you as a very intelligent but uninitiated person in a field, like stuff that just can't achieve that cross that barrier, I think is in some sense fraudulent. If you're unable to, and I'm not a like particle physicist, right? So perhaps there is something that like there is some kind of domain that's you just can't ever like explain it to someone else. But I actually doubt that. I think that our ability to, at least in theory, cross that divide, have shorter form, maybe more entertaining form stuff, is a certification that we are doing something that's useful to society and that we can explain to other people, and explain to people who have no kind of interest in accepting it. When you're in this cloistered small world I was talking about earlier, anyone you're like sharing something with is like incentivized to pretend like it's like it makes sense when it doesn't.
Right.
And this,
yeah,
this thing,
I'm absolutely,
yeah.
I'm absolutely with you. I just lent up to get a book off my shelf. This is a really fantastic book. I'll just show it here. It's called Learn to Write Badly: How to Succeed in the Social Sciences. So the point of this book is that, I mean, the book starts out by saying, actually, a lot of people are successful in the social sciences because they have consciously learned how to write badly. And they deliberately write badly in order to exclude, to exclude large numbers of people from accessing the text with terminology, convoluted phraseology, and all sorts of other different things, in order to appear very erudite. And I'm very much an empirical social scientist, and this really annoys me about theorists. The theorists write in this impenetrable language deliberately to be impenetrable.
Yeah.
And that really, really annoys me because they should be trying to do the opposite, to make their work accessible, but they do it because they think it enhances their career and it makes other people, it impresses other people, and so that they might be a successful, how to succeed in the social sciences. So I love it when people make their research, however complex, accessible to intelligent and reasonably well-educated ordinary people and open-minded ordinary people who are willing to engage with it. I love it. I think it's fantastic. The point about being exclusive that I was talking about earlier, and is that it actually fuels the anti-intellectualism that we see in so much of particularly Anglo-American society. That it actually fuels the doubt that people have in the validity of and the accuracy and authority and honesty and truth of science. Because it distances the scientist, or it actually distances the theorist very often from the citizens that really they should be trying to inform and connect with. And I think if AI can enhance that, and if we're transparent about that, then fantastic.
I agree. It's a difficult conversation because I think we are kind of aligned in our values a lot, but sometimes you can get to some cool places with that, and I think we did do that. Any final words? I'll let you guys go. You guys have been so generous with your time, but any final words?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to first thank you both. Like, I've had like very fun time talking to you all. Glad that you're doing this, and then also, I must say, Peter, like I feel like you should do more of these. The fact that you had a book out, like to actually prove your point, and you had like a very nice, articulate, like ending to this, which like I think resonated with me at least a lot. I'm just like that's awesome. That's awesome.
That was entirely spontaneous, and
yeah, no, it was great. It was great.
yeah, I mean, I loved our discussion. Thank you, Patrick, and I really learned a lot. Really nice to hear from Parth and what you're doing. It's really been interesting for me, and I feel like I've just sort of, if you have a 12 lecture module at university, I've just been through 3 lectures, and I've learned so much from just interacting with you both. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, the feeling's mutual, and who knows, maybe we'll do it again at some point. Let's all be in touch. Great meeting you both, and thanks again for your generosity.
No, thank you.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Best of luck.
Bye.